Imagine you're miles out in a bone-dry desert looking for scrap metal. You stumble across something impossible. A massive, rusted military submarine half buried in the dirt 50 miles from the ocean. You pry open the hatch, expecting to find old copper and dust. Instead, you find a hidden steel door, a working keypad, warm coffee, and at the bottom of it all, something that would eventually take down a politician, a police chief, and an entire underground criminal network. Three ordinary guys found exactly that. And what they did next is one of the craziest true hero stories you'll ever hear. The river had been dead for years. No water, no current, just a scar of cracked earth cutting through flat, sun-bleached terrain. Which is exactly why no one could explain the submarine. Peter saw it first. A long, dark shape curving out of the silt like the rib cage of some massive, dead leviathan. He stopped dead in his tracks. "Jeff, Tom, look at this." The three of them worked for a small-time salvage outfit. They spent their days stripping copper from condemned buildings and hauling heavy scrap. They were used to finding weird things dumped in the desert, but a 60-foot decommissioned submarine sitting in a dry riverbed? "How is that even possible?" Tom muttered, wiping sweat from his neck. Jeff just shook his head. "It's not." But Peter didn't say anything. He was already walking toward it. And if Tom and Jeff had been paying closer attention, they might have noticed that Peter didn't walk like a guy looking for scrap metal. He moved deliberately, eyes scanning the ridge, checking his blind spots. The exterior hatch groaned in protest, raining decades of rust down on them as they pried it open with a crowbar. The air inside tasted like iron and dead earth. They dropped down into the gloom, clicking on their flashlights. It was gutted, skeletal, compartment after compartment completely stripped clean. "Nothing here but tetanus," Jeff sighed, leaning against a bulkhead. "Let's bounce, we're wasting daylight." But Peter was crouched on the floor, his flashlight beam fixed on the steel grating. "No, we're not," Peter said quietly. He pointed. Footprints, fresh ones in the dust. They led to a section of the floor that didn't match the rest, a concealed trapdoor. And bolted across it wasn't a rusty old padlock. It was a heavy-duty biometric steel deadbolt, an electronic lock with a blinking red LED. Jeff swallowed hard. "Okay, someone's actively using this. We need to leave, right now." "Go grab the angle grinder from the truck," Peter said, not taking his eyes off the lock. Tom hesitated, but something in Peter's voice made him move. 10 minutes later, the riverbed echoed with the deafening screech of cutting metal. When the deadbolt finally snapped, the heavy door hissed open. Cold, air-conditioned air blew up into their faces. Beneath the hatch was a steel ladder, descending into darkness. Peter went first. And again, Tom noticed something weird. Peter held his heavy maglite flashlight up near his shoulder, tight to his jaw, a tactical grip. Not how a salvage guy holds a light. At the bottom, they stepped into a space that made zero sense. 4 modern LED panels lit up a corridor lined in brushed stainless steel. It was pristine, climate-controlled. The quiet hum of an expensive ventilation system vibrated in the walls. Peter pressed a button on the wall. A heavy security door slid open. This wasn't an abandoned sub. It was a multi-million-dollar bunker, using the rusted hull purely as camouflage. Behind the door was a fully furnished office, a leather chair, filing cabinets. Sitting on the desk was a laptop in sleep mode, a flash drive, and a ceramic coffee mug. Tom reached out and touched the mug. "Guys," Tom's voice shook. "It's warm. Someone was just here." Jeff was already backing toward the door. "I'm out. I am not getting killed over some cartel hideout." But Peter wasn't listening. He was staring at the back wall. There was a bookshelf, but it was slightly misaligned. Scuff marks on the concrete floor showed it moved in an arc. Peter grabbed the edge and pulled. It swung open, revealing a dim, narrow concrete hallway. They crept down it. In the first room, a high-res surveillance camera on a tripod. Tom grabbed the memory card, pocketing it on pure instinct. Then, they reached the final door. Wrapped in thick, industrial chains. Whatever was behind it, someone had gone to terrifying lengths to make sure it didn't get out. The chains hit the floor. Peter pulled the door open. and all three men stopped breathing. Two children, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, huddled together on a thin mattress in the corner. Their faces were paper white. They didn't cry out for help. They just stared at the door with absolute animal terror, the kind of learned helplessness that comes from knowing every time that door opens, a nightmare walks in. Peter immediately dropped to one knee. He pointed his flashlight at the floor to soften the glare. When he spoke, his voice lost all its tactical edge. It was just gentle, raw humanity. "Hey," Peter whispered. "It's okay. We're the good guys." The little girl pulled her brother tighter. Her lips trembled. "They'll come back. They always come back." Through tears and broken whispers, the kids told them everything. A black van, masked men, snatched off the street walking home from school. They were waiting for their parents to pay a ransom. Jeff turned his face to the wall. He was a tough, blue-collar guy, but his hands were violently shaking. Tom felt sick to his stomach. Peter looked at the kids. "Listen to me. I am getting you out of this hole right now, and I promise you, no one is ever locking you in the dark again." They didn't waste a second. Peter grabbed the laptop's flash drive. Jeff scooped up the little girl. Tom carried the boy. They scrambled up the ladder, bursting out of the rusted sub into the blinding desert sun. They threw it in gear and tore down the dirt road toward the nearest hospital. On the way, Peter made a phone call. He was speaking in 10 codes, rattling off coordinates, ordering perimeters. When they finally reached the ER, doctors rushed the kids into the back. Jeff and Tom slumped into the waiting room chairs, adrenaline crashing, trying to process the absolute insanity of the last 2 hours. Peter stood by the window, composed. Tom looked at him. "Who the hell are you? Really?" Peter let out a long, exhausted sigh. He looked at the two guys he'd spent the last 6 months hauling scrap with. "I'm a federal agent," Peter said quietly. "I've been deep undercover trying to crack a massive kidnapping ring in this state. Joining your salvage crew gave me the perfect cover to snoop around abandoned properties without raising suspicion." Jeff stood up, furious. "You used us? You brought us into a cartel bunker with no warning?" "I know," Peter said, his voice thick with genuine regret. "And I am so sorry. I swear to you, I didn't know the kids were in that submarine. I thought it was just a dead drop. But if you guys hadn't brought those power tools, if you hadn't stayed with me, those kids would be dead." Peter held up the flash drive. "And now, we have the keys to the whole kingdom." What was on that drive was a waking nightmare. It wasn't just a couple of thugs in a van. It was an entire corrupt ecosystem. There were spreadsheets, ledgers, a local politician who swept missing person reports under the rug, a school principal who literally handed over the schedules of children from wealthy families, and worst of all, a high-ranking police officer, someone inside the department who tipped the kidnappers off every time a SWAT team was mobilizing. "This is why we could never catch them," Peter said, staring at the screen. "Every time we got close, the dirty cop warned them." Suddenly, Peter's burner phone buzzed. He read the text and his blood ran cold. "The kidnappers just picked up the ransom money," Peter said. "They're on the move." "Call your backup," Jeff yelled. "I can't," Peter snapped back. "The local dispatch is compromised. If I call it in, the dirty cop tips them off and these guys vanish forever." Peter looked at Jeff and Tom. "I have to flush them out myself." Tom didn't even blink. He threw Peter the truck keys. "We're driving." They rolled into a quiet, upper-class suburban neighborhood. This was the address tied to the real estate agent who bought the bunker's land. Peter turned to Jeff and Tom. "Stay in the truck, no matter what." Peter walked right up to the front door of a beautiful 2-story house. He knocked. A man opened it. He was sweating profusely, looking incredibly nervous. Peter put on a goofy blue-collar smile. "Hey there! I work for a local salvage crew. Funny story, we were just out in the dry riverbed and found an old submarine. We popped the hatch and you wouldn't believe what's inside. You should come check it out." The man's face went completely ghost white. He slammed the door shut. Peter casually walked back to the truck. Drive around the corner and cut the engine. Now." "Are you insane?" Jeff asked. "You just warned him." "No," Peter said, his eyes locked on the house. "I panicked him. If he thinks random scavengers found the bunker, he knows the police are coming next. He's not going to run away. He's going to run back to the submarine." Tom realized it with a sickening jolt. To silence the witnesses. Less than 2 minutes later, a black van tire screamed out of the driveway, tearing down the street toward the desert. They were rushing back to the sub to tie up loose ends. They had no idea the kids were already safe in a hospital, and they had no idea Peter's federal tactical team, who bypassed the local cops completely, was waiting for them. The van didn't make it 2 miles. Unmarked SUVs slammed into them from all sides. Federal agents swarmed the vehicle, dragging 3 men out into the dirt and slapping cuffs on them. The dominoes fell that exact same night. Federal agents kicked down doors across the city. The politician, the principal, the dirty cop pulled right out from behind his own desk in handcuffs while his deputies watched in shock. But the only moment that actually mattered happened back at the hospital. Jeff and Tom were drinking terrible vending machine coffee when the elevator doors flew open. A mother and father sprinted down the hallway. When the dad saw his little boy sitting on the hospital bed, his knees literally gave out. He collapsed onto the linoleum floor, burying his face in his son's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. The little girl wrapped her arms around her mom's neck. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Peter watched from the doorway. He looked back at Tom and Jeff. The 2 salvage guys had tears in their eyes. Nobody said a word. They didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, the story exploded. 2 ordinary guys who stripped copper for a living were honored for helping dismantle one of the most ruthless syndicates in the state's history. Peter returned to his agency, his cover blown, his job done. But before he left, he shook their hands one last time. "You guys had every excuse to walk away today," Peter told them, "but you didn't. 2 kids are sleeping in their own beds tonight because of you." The submarine is still sitting out in that dry riverbed, rusting in the sun. Its secrets finally ripped open and dragged into the light. But it leaves behind a question. When you stumble into something that is absolutely not your problem, something dangerous, something that would be so easy to just turn your back on and walk away from, do you keep going? Or do you turn around? Jeff and Tom made their choice, and it changed everything. If this story gave you chills, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. The world is full of dark secrets, but it's also full of ordinary people who refuse to look away. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.